Hi there, this is Bianca Lopez, and this is Be in the Know, brought to you by OWI and Tail. And I have one of my favorite people who I met at a conference, Nishant. You're the CTO of Uniken and a proud supporter of women in identity. If you haven't seen, there's a t-shirt, we can zoom into it, and there's too many cool chicks, and I happen to make it to the list, so that's the only reason. I'm kidding. Tell me, you've been in identity for quite some time, you fell into it. Tell me your story.
Well, as you said, I kind of fell into it because it was just part of being a software engineer, and when I fell into it, I had no idea what I was doing was identity management.
Yeah.
It was just programming, working with Active Directory, Microsoft systems, managing things like account provisioning and deprovisioning, and then from there it just grew and grew and grew, and we kind of sort of took off at some point, and my understanding of the space started to grow. Once I got acquired, the company I was at got acquired into Oracle, that sort of broadened my horizons a bit because I started to look at things more strategically, broader portfolio, and really got a better understanding of where identity management was at that time, largely focused on enterprise.
Yeah.
What I've now been doing is a lot more around consumer.
So talk about it.
Yeah.
Why do you, I have this passion, I've shared it with you so many times, that I don't think people actually understand what their identity is. So why did Uniken decide to focus on the consumer? Because it's a really tough problem, right?
Yeah.
And what is your focus? What do you guys do?
So our focus is around the fact that today, when you're dealing with consumer-oriented technologies, user experience and security often ends up being a choice.
It's a trade-off. People call it as if it's not. This is not a balancing act. Like, balancing acts to me are for yoga and the circus, and leave them there. It shouldn't be an or, it should be an and.
Correct. And a big key in making it or converting it from or to and is identity. Identity is the glue that can help you have strong security and at the same time have really great user experience. And one of the challenges we found is people weren't thinking about it that way.
Yeah.
And a lot of it had to do with the sort of enterprise-oriented thinking, enterprise identity management-oriented thinking that
Which
has
is
come
what?
into consumer identity
Mostly
management.
parameter security, threat levels, leave the
Exactly.
bad guys out at any cost.
And the notion that a end user is a captive audience, which means that you can dictate to them what they should do, how they should engage with you.
Love that you're saying this, because most people in large enterprises, especially banks, think they own the consumer, therefore you go my way.
Right.
And you're saying, screw that, that's not the way to go.
Right.
The consumer has a very short attention span.
Mm-hmm. And they have choice. In the consumer market, end users have choice. If they don't like what you're giving them, they can go to somebody else, which typically employees don't have. So employees just do whatever you tell them to do, whereas consumers, for them, the user experience is a factor in how they engage with the business and whether they want to engage with the business in the first place. And so what you typically find in the consumer space is people downgrading security because they don't want to introduce the friction that security introduces.
Yeah.
And what drew me to Uniken was a really cool core technology set that really allowed us to expand that into a business value proposition around making it possible for you to get really strong security and at the same time get a really good user experience.
So what do you do? What is the secret sauce? Because most people get in love with like a point solution. I used to be in the biometric space, like they fall in love with like, okay, I'm gonna put Touch ID and the world's gonna be beautiful, even though they don't realize that. By the way, if your SDK, I need to do this parenthesis, if your SDK uses Touch ID, you get a token back. You don't actually know if it's me or if it's Nishant, who I gave my phone to. So you have actually no idea. So back to this, how do you do that? What is the secret sauce in the core set of technologies, and what are some of the principles that you guys use to change that game for consumers?
Sure, so we used to call it unified defense in depth.
Okay.
I think the industry broadly has moved towards this terminology called zero trust security.
Okay. Explain to people in plain terms, what is zero trust security in your eyes?
So in my eyes, zero trust security, a term that I actually don't like because it has a very negative connotation when you hear about it the first time. But
how are you going to build an infrastructure of zero trust?
Exactly. I think, but the core principle is, I think, correct, which is you start from a point of zero trust and you build up the trust very rapidly to the engagement model by making sure that all the elements required for you to get the trust are there and present. You're essentially validating all the elements.
Just like a human builds a relationship. Like, I don't trust you today because I just met you, but over time I gather insights, you tell me things, and I'm sort of collecting that history to build, yes, do I trust you with my bank account versus do I trust you just with my Twitter handle? Do I trust you with everything that I have?
Right.
Is
And
that the notion of how this gets
sort
built?
of. So you brought in an element around identity engagement. And so identity engagement is one aspect, which is doing things like strong or high assurance identity proofing and using high assurance identity proofing as a way of establishing strong credentials.
Okay.
But then you have the ongoing engagement where you're not going to go through that each and every time the user is engaging. And
Which
that's
is
where
my
you have-
biggest problem, right?
Right.
Like people do KYC as a linear thing, as
Right.
if the same way I build a relationship with you, I just met you. Imagine if you were now, I was asking you the same questions I asked you the first time I met you.
Exactly.
It's like, I'm a really bad listener. That's not a way of, I think, building trust. How do we use data, or what is the platform at Unicron doing to sort of keep that build up of my identity and sort of stronger assurance that, yeah, it is really you, and here's all the other things that I learned about you.
Right.
And you're calling that identity engagement, right?
Right. So the notion is authentication has always been built around the notion of authentication credentials. Credentials is a term getting overloaded right now at this conference, especially because we're talking about it in different aspects.
I know.
But
What is your
authentication
definition of credential?
Well, it comes based on where you're coming from, right?
This is why this industry is darn complicated, guys. But yes, okay,
Exactly.
back to authentication
But
credentials.
the point is, authentication tokens or credentials, whatever you want to call them, your username, password, essentially, was always a proxy for you to use to re-engage with the business without having to go through that first flow
Original
all over
onboarding
right?
again.
And one part of this is that from a platform perspective, what we tried to do was bridge the gap between the two, which was oftentimes as a business, as a bank, you would go through this process of setting up a really strong high assurance identity through KYC.
Yep.
And at the end of it, you would give out or hand out a really weak token, which was
Normally,
a username, password,
yeah,
or something to that
or
effect.
a RSA token
Right.
or anything. Yeah.
And obviously, because that was not strong enough, you had to add in additional layers for two factors. So a lot of banks went to SMS-based 2FA.
PVQs, like personal verified
all that sort of
questions,
stuff.
all that fun stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And what we now know is, if you look at it from a security perspective, you have a much broader environment that you need to worry about. SMS OTP is a problem not just because of people getting
Man in
phished,
the middle and people getting phished.
but it's also
yep.
because of devices
Of
having
course,
malware
I
that
get,
can capture it.
and I get insane. And just talk about the user for a second. Like if I'm in a roaming charge or in a different country and I need to get an SMS push notification, I'm annoyed.
Right.
I'm like, I just gave you two other things, like just get me through here.
Right.
Like, can't you just take an accelerometer, the data around it, what can you do?
Right.
So what are you doing to change that?
So what we're doing is we're basically bringing in multiple aspects of security protection into one solution. So the idea is if you're a bank that has a mobile app that your customer is using, make that mobile app first and foremost really locked down against device, network, and identity threats. So that
Okay.
it becomes really locked down against
So
all
there's
the
a
major vectors of breach.
multi-variable component in order to make the decision
Right.
making.
And you need to make all of those work together because if you're handling device threats separate from identity threats, separate
Which
from
mostly
network
are.
threats,
Most inside of enterprise live in silo. They'll
And
have
it's-
QRadar to look at, events, and then they'll have something else to look at over here, and then none of these things to usually communicate to each other.
Exactly. They're all point solutions. And essentially, you spend months, maybe sometimes even years, integrating all of them together. And what happens is day one, when you release it, it's perfect, and then it immediately starts degrading.
Yeah.
Because you have different patching solutions.
And just
everything.
data
It
richness
just-
gets lost,
Yeah.
right?
And so having all of those point solutions just moves the attack vector to different aspects. The attackers now look for the sort of the mortar in the middle of the bricks. What is that glue that I can attack to get through through it? So SMS OTP, I can compromise it because I can do a man-in-the-middle attack, or I can put malware that can automatically pick it up and replay it. Nothing to do with your SMS OTP infrastructure.
Yeah.
It has entirely to do with the device that was operating on or the network you were connecting to. And users connecting to free airport Wi-Fi's or just downloading free VPNs, which are all doing man-in-the-middle attacks.
Which people do that all the time. Because
Exactly.
they just are not conscious of it.
But we shouldn't blame the user for that because
course
it's
not.
not
They don't know. That's
they
not
don't know
their
the threat
problem.
model,
Yeah.
right? So
They're not sitting there in the airport going, what am I giving away now?
Exactly. So the idea here is let's make sure that you have a seamless security package that brings all of these together into one solution that you add to your mobile app and really make that mobile app strong.
So
against
Unicron
all
is
of
an
this.
SDK that has a set of APIs that I can integrate to my app.
Yes, and
Okay.
it also, on the other end of that, provides a set of API side gateway that essentially allows you to have a strongly authenticated, secure connection from that mobile app to your backend.
Okay.
And that provides you end-to-end privacy and security control, which is critical where you're worrying about third-party intrusion, man-in-the-middle attacks. But that also
Or when you're opening your APIs, if you're in
Right.
open banking standards and saying, now I want to connect to more products.
Exactly. And once you have a strongly authenticated secure communication channel with your customer, it really opens up the possibility of extending security to other channels that you typically don't think about. So oftentimes what happens today is banks spend a lot of money really securing their web and their mobile, and the attack vector shifts to the call center.
Yeah.
Because it's really easy to call
Weakest
up customer
point,
service
yeah.
and do an account takeover attack through the call center, which now gets you into digital. So ignoring other channels, and especially today's environment, you have new channels like chatbots and
Too
smart
many
home
channels,
assistants.
yeah.
You need consistency across that because the inconsistency gives a weakest link issue for you where attackers look for where's the weakest part of that, and that's what I go after.
Yeah.
It creates frustration for end users, and the more frustration, the more variability you create
And
for end
it's
users.
not linear that they do this. They're like, okay, now we're going to go into another channel. We're going to put the same processes. It's like, no, you missed the point. Context,
Right.
devices, everything has changed.
Exactly, it's all completely different. So if you can create consistency and create uniformity for the end user, uniform experience, a simpler experience, that's really what sort of drives the customer experience to be better, more intuitive, more natural for the end customer, and drives a better engagement model, bigger share of wallet, and you can. Some of the interesting stuff we've been doing
You
is
probably get so much rich data in order to be able to like actually service your clients and make decisions on what is their process from beginning to the end, right? Because if you're
Right.
connecting these data sets, now I have a very different view of my journey.
Correct. And you're also, because the engagement model is more natural, you're actually getting higher engagement with customers. So we've seen, each of our customers has seen 100 to 300% increase in customer engagement.
That's amazing.
Because the security actually made the user experience better, allowed more utility in the mobile app. where
Yeah,
you
because now I
previously
can
couldn't
give
do
you
it.
more stuff, like more
Exactly.
access to things because I have a higher degree of
Exactly.
assurance.
So really, it's unlocking a lot of these sort of digital transformation opportunities that banks want and various organizations want to have and have been sort of held back from because of security concerns or customer experience concerns. Again, that whole balance and choice that they have to
Stop
make.
the trade-off unless you're all turning into yogis, okay? That's the news for the day. You've been coming to OWI for a few years now? Or is this your
yeah,
first
this is
year
my first at
and as a
No.
vendor and no?
Yeah.
That's exciting. What has it been like for you as an experience?
Really good. It's really interesting to see some of the conversations that are happening here. Obviously, a lot of conversations on things like self-sovereign identity, which is really interesting. A lot of focus
Interesting
on
from an intellectual perspective or interesting
Intellectual.
from an application? Okay.
Intellectual.
I had a feeling.
I think right now, self-sovereign identity is at that point where I think
It's a human dignity
Heather
problem.
Wesson put it really well in her tech talk yesterday. She said it's at an experimental phase,
Yeah.
and we're not going to figure out all the issues and the problems, and therefore get to the promised land unless we go through the experimental phase and have critical thought and critical thinking around
And
this,
conversations,
and conversation
yeah.
around it, and have multiple players bringing in and adding a little bit of co-opetition into the mix. Those are critical elements in creating something that can succeed in the market. So I think there's a lot of conversation happening here around that. There's clearly a lot of conversation happening around things like where is identity management going? Not just in the self-sovereign space, but things like what is the future of identity proofing and verification? How are we going there?
What are the phases and who needs to
exactly.
in-house versus outsource? I just hope this industry changes and this like literacy conversation like carries on and we stop talking acronyms because it's just painful.
Yeah.
Nishant, I have to thank you for coming
My
on the show
pleasure.
as
My pleasure.
always, and thank you for being a supporter of women in identity. And I hope I get my own T-shirt soon. And
Absolutely.
be in the know, and we'll see you next time.